Ladies and gentlemen, asterisk, what does it take to challenge an empire? Asterisk, what courage must live in the heart of a man who dares to say no to centuries of control, manipulation, and silence? Asterisk, stay with me. Because this is not just a speech, this is a journey into the heart of a revolution that is shaking the foundations of global power. Asterisk, and at the center of it all a young soldier named Captain Ibrahim Traoré. Ladies and gentlemen, asterisk, there are moments in history when the ordinary transforms into the extraordinary, when the winds of change blow through the corridors of power, not from the centers of global might, but from the margins quietly at first, then with the force of a storm. And in those moments, new names rise, names that history did not anticipate, but destiny had already prepared. Today we gather to understand such a name, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, not merely as a man in uniform, not merely as the interim president of Burkina Faso, but as a symbol, as a spark, and perhaps even as the beginning of a revolution much larger than himself. Asterisk, it is tempting to view leaders through the lens of their titles, their age, their resume, their alliances, but Captain Traoré did not emerge from a long political dynasty or an international negotiation table. He emerged from the heart of the people. He rose from a soil tired of broken promises, from a generation that had waited long enough. In 2022, at just 34 years old, he led a revolution that unseated power not for personal gain, but in response to the overwhelming cries of a people suffocating under insecurity, poverty, and disillusionment. Asterisk, he did not ask, will they approve of me? He asked, what must be done? That question so rare in politics, so dangerous to the status quo, is what sets revolutionary leaders apart. It is not just that he came to power, but how and why he came to power that forces us to take a closer look. Traoré's ascent was not the result of polished campaigns or international endorsement. It was a direct response to chaos, a response to violence, a response to a system that had ceased to serve its citizens. Burkina Faso, rich in culture and spirit, had become a battleground of competing interests, terrorist insurgencies on the ground and geopolitical games from above. Asterisk, but Traoré was different. He did not play games. He did not beg for validation. He spoke the language of justice. He spoke the language of youth, of urgency, of unfiltered truth. And for that, millions began to listen. Not because they were told to, but because, in his defiance, they heard echoes of their own suppressed dreams. Asterisk, as Traoré stepped into leadership, he made something very clear. This was not just a change in office, it was a change in philosophy, a shift away from external dependency, a break from the comfort of foreign aid that comes wrapped in invisible chains. He saw what many feared to name, that the continent's biggest enemies may not be the ones in our forests, but the ones in our boardrooms and behind diplomatic smiles. He recognized what too many have ignored, that Africa is still, in many ways, not free, not truly. Asterisk, and this leads us to a much deeper truth, a much older wound, the question of African sovereignty. What does it mean to be free if your policies are dictated by foreign institutions? What does it mean to govern if your economy is designed to benefit others before your own? Traoré, like others before him, saw that Burkina Faso was independent in name, but not in power. He saw that national resources were extracted and exported while his people remained impoverished. He understood that true freedom is constructed, reclaimed, and defended. Asterisk, it is easy to speak of sovereignty. Politicians do it all the time. But to pursue it, to demand it, to fight for it against the tides of global pressure, that is a different story. Traoré began to question the presence of foreign troops on his soil, not out of hostility, but out of principle. He asked what many African leaders have been too afraid or too compromised to ask: are these foreign forces here to protect us, or to protect their interests? Who truly benefits from these arrangements? And if these troops cannot stop the violence, then what is their purpose? These are not rebellious questions. They are responsible ones. Asterisk, and yet, in a world where truth is often punished, these questions triggered backlash. The West, comfortable in its narrative of benevolence, was unsettled. Media outlets began to shape a new image of Traoré, not as a reformer, but as a threat. Because the moment you challenge the system, you become dangerous not by your weapons, but by your ideas. Asterisk, but let us pause and consider what kind of world we live in when a leader becomes controversial simply for putting his people first. When insisting on national dignity is seen as radical, what does that say about the global order? And more importantly, what does it say about us, the observers, the listeners, the next generation of leaders? Captain Traoré represents a broader hunger across the African continent. Hunger not for war, but for self-determination, a hunger to decide one's own path. For too long, Africa has been portrayed as a continent of crisis, of need, of dysfunction. But beneath that narrative lies another reality of wealth, of resilience, of untapped power. The problem has never been that Africa is poor. The problem is that Africa's riches have rarely been allowed to benefit Africans. Asterisk, this is where the idea of neocolonialism enters the frame. It is not a conspiracy. It is a pattern. It is a system that maintains control through subtler methods, through debt, through trade policies, through media framing, and yes, through military cooperation. While former colonial powers no longer govern directly, they continue to shape policy, extract resources, and influence decisions through institutions they control. And every time an African leader resists that influence, there are consequences: economic pressure, diplomatic isolation, or worse. Traoré knows this. He has seen the history. He knows what happened to those before him who dared to speak out to Lumumba. But still, he moves forward, not with arrogance, but with conviction, because he understands something vital. The cost of silence is greater than the cost of resistance. And that is a lesson every young African must learn. When you are born into a world that teaches you to defer, to obey, to be grateful for crumbs, you forget what it means to stand tall. But Traoré's example is reminding many that dignity is not a luxury, it is a necessity. It is the foundation of any lasting progress. His leadership is waking up a generation that has been taught to look outward for solutions. He is reminding them to look inward to their own minds, their own resources, their own strength. And in doing so, he has become more than a leader. He has become a mirror reflecting both the potential of Africa and the forces that seek to suppress it. He is not perfect. No leader is, but perfection is not the point. The point is courage. The point is vision. The point is willingness to act when everyone else remains still. Some say he is being too bold, too defiant. But to that, we must ask, what has politeness ever earned Africa? What have decades of compliance brought us except continued exploitation? There comes a time when politeness becomes complicity, when diplomacy becomes a disguise for submission. That time has long passed. The global order today is not just built on diplomacy, it is built on interests. And Traoré understands that. He is not anti-West, he is pro-Africa. There is a difference, a crucial difference. Being pro-Africa does not mean isolation, it means engagement on equal terms. It means partnership, not patronage, respect, not instruction. And that, more than any speech, is what he demands. Yet to demand that is to step into dangerous waters, because power never yields without a struggle. When a nation tries to take back its gold, its oil, its land, its dignity, those who benefit from its weakness will not remain silent. They will resist, not always through open war, but through pressure, manipulation, and distortion of truth. This is why we must pay attention, because this is not just a political shift, it is a psychological one. Traoré is fighting not just for land, but for narrative, for the right of Africans to define their own story, to choose their own heroes, to determine their own future. And that, more than anything, terrifies the old order. The story of Africa has always been told by others. Its tragedies have been broadcast, its victories ignored. But something is changing. And that change is not happening in luxury offices or foreign capitals. It is happening in dusty towns, on youth forums, in street debates, in songs, in art, in resistance movements, and, yes, in the bold declarations of leaders like Traoré. He is not the first to call for liberation. He will not be the last, but he is among the few in our time to act with such clarity, at such a young age, with such unapologetic belief in African potential. And that matters, because every revolution needs symbols, every awakening needs a face, not to worship, but to remind us that change is not a myth. It is a choice made every day by those who refuse to be silent, who refuse to be bought, and who dare to dream beyond imposed limits. And so, as we move forward in this conversation, let us carry with us the fire that this story ignites. Let us remember that what is at stake is not just one country's sovereignty, but the soul of a continent. Let us not be fooled by polite diplomacy or empty slogans. Let us look deeper, let us question, let us awaken, because the struggle is far from over. And as this fire begins to burn across the continent, there is one force more powerful than any weapon, any foreign base, or any policy: the African youth. The youth are no longer the future, they are the present. They are not waiting for permission to lead, they are stepping into the arena with questions, with passion, with urgency. And leaders like Captain Ibrahim Traoré do not speak down to them, they speak with them, because he knows that any revolution not driven by the youth is already dead on arrival. There is a reason why the most repressive systems fear educated and awakened youth. It is because the youth are the heartbeat of change. They have the energy to move, the hunger to challenge, and the refusal to accept what their parents were forced to normalize. In Africa, where over 60% of the population is under 25, we are sitting on the greatest resource the continent has ever known: not oil, not gold, not cobalt, but young minds that are beginning to see clearly. Minds that are tired of being used as foot soldiers for foreign agendas. Minds that are tired of the cycle of poverty, of migration, of silence. Captain Traoré, in every word and every action, is reaching out to these youth not with fake promises, but with shared fire. He is not telling them to wait. He is showing them what it means to act. In every speech, in every policy shift, in every rejection of foreign dependency, he is saying, this is your land, this is your fight, and this is your time. For decades, young Africans have been told to go abroad, to find a future. But Traoré's message is different. He is saying that the future must be built here, by the hands that have suffered, by the voices that have been silenced, by the spirits that never gave up. He is reminding us that Pan-Africanism is not just a philosophy, it is a practical weapon against division, that unity is not a slogan, it is a strategy, that the youth of Senegal, Nigeria, Ghana, Sudan, and Congo are not separate, they are one people with one struggle, wearing many uniforms. When youth unite, when they cross borders, not as refugees but as revolutionaries, a new Africa will be born, not imposed from outside, but rising from within. An Africa that knows its worth, an Africa that is not ashamed to stand tall, an Africa that remembers that before colonization, it was the cradle of civilization, and that after liberation, it can once again be a beacon to the world. But let us be clear, this journey will not be easy, because every movement that dares to rise must be prepared to face opposition, real opposition. Not just in the form of criticism but in the form of sabotage, isolation, and in some cases elimination. The price of courage is high. And Captain Traoré, like the freedom fighters before him, walks a path that is both inspiring and dangerous. To stand against foreign domination is one thing, but to stand against it while under threat, while surrounded by enemies both seen and unseen, requires a different kind of strength. The strength of purpose, the strength of clarity, the strength that comes not from power, but from principle. And when we study the lives of those who came before Lumumba Sankara and Nkrumah, we see a pattern. The moment they began to mobilize the people, to awaken the youth, to challenge the global power structures, they were labeled as radicals, destabilizers, threats to peace. But what is peace if it is built on submission? What is order if it depends on inequality? True peace does not come from silence, it comes from justice. And Traoré, like those before him, is not afraid to disturb the unjust peace that keeps his people in chains. He knows that real leadership is not about pleasing everyone, it is about protecting your people, even if the world turns against you. This is the cost of resistance. And it is why many refuse to take the path Traoré is taking. It is easier to smile for cameras, easier to accept aid packages that come with invisible contracts, easier to live in mansions while your people starve, as long as you are praised in Western newspapers. But easy is not the path of liberation. Easy is not the path of dignity. So yes, he has enemies, not because he has harmed them, but because he has denied them access to control, denied them access to silence, denied them the illusion that Africa will always be obedient. And in doing so, he has inspired a new generation of resistance, not just with guns, but with knowledge, with awareness, with refusal to compromise on the dream of a free continent. This resistance is not reckless, it is strategic. It is grounded in the understanding that sovereignty means nothing if it can be revoked by external pressure, that independence is a lie if your currency is printed abroad, that democracy is meaningless if your media is controlled by foreign narratives, that security is an illusion if foreign armies are the ones deciding your national priorities. And here lies the greatest danger of all, the war on truth. Because when a leader begins to tell uncomfortable truths, the world often responds not by listening but by distorting. They say he is a dictator. They say he is too young. They say he is aligning with the wrong countries, but rarely do they ask, why is he doing this? What conditions forced such a decision? What pain, what betrayal, what injustice led to such radical clarity? Because asking those questions would require accountability. And accountability threatens the very structures that have benefited from Africa's division and exploitation for decades. So Traoré becomes a case study in narrative warfare, a reminder that controlling the story is just as important as controlling the land, that if you cannot kill the dream, you smear the dreamer. But the youth are no longer falling for it. They are no longer accepting the version of events told by those who benefit from their suffering. They are researching, they are asking questions, they are connecting dots, they are waking up. And as they wake up, the global conscience must also awaken. Because what is happening in Africa today is not just a regional issue, it is a reflection of a global system that needs reform. A system where wealth flows upward, where justice bends toward power, and where independence is tolerated only when it poses no threat. But every continent must ask itself, what kind of world are we building? One where some are forever dominant and others forever dependent, or one where every nation, every people, every culture has the right to shape its own destiny. Traoré's fight then is not just an African fight, it is a human fight. A fight for fairness in a world designed for imbalance. A fight for dignity in a system that profits from desperation. A fight for equality in a game where the rules are written by the winners. It is a test not just of African resilience, but of global integrity. Will we support those who dare to rise, or will we remain comfortable in our complicity? Will we applaud freedom only when it fits our interests, or will we recognize that freedom must be universal or it is meaningless? Asterisk, and this is where we must go deeper, because the success or failure of this movement will depend not just on Traoré, not just on Burkina Faso, but on the millions who are watching, some with hope, some with fear, and many with indifference. But indifference is no longer an option, because history does not forgive those who sleep through their revolution. Asterisk, this moment demands clarity, it demands courage, it demands choice, and it demands that each of us, whether on the continent or in the diaspora, whether in positions of influence or at the grassroots, decide which side of history we want to stand on. Asterisk, because what Traoré is doing, in essence, is forcing a confrontation between two worldviews, one that sees Africa as a resource, and one that sees Africa as a sovereign, one that wants Africa to follow, and one that wants Africa to lead, one that sees young Africans as labor, and one that sees them as leaders. Asterisk, and as we continue forward, we must understand that this is not just about policy, it is about philosophy. It is about reclaiming the idea that Africans are not problems to be solved, but people to be respected, that their destiny is not to be managed, but to be self-determined, that their future is not for sale. Asterisk, what Traoré represents is more than a single presidency. He represents the rebirth of an idea long buried under military bases, structural adjustments, and manipulated democracies, the idea that Africa belongs to Africans, fully, unapologetically, irrevocably. Asterisk, and that is an idea that will continue to be explored as this story unfolds.